we are live. Welcome back, Nikki Johnson.
Thank you so much, Emelina.
Yes, thank you for coming back. I have to say before we start that your conversation, I met you through Conversations NYC, and you just did your first virtual one, and I thought it was so cool. And so for anyone who's watching who wants more, definitely check out Conversations NYC on the Meetup. On Meetup, is that the best way to find it?
Yeah, and the official title is Conversations New York. So yeah.
Okay, Conversations New York. And you personally host it the second Tuesday. What is it?
The second Friday of every month. Yeah.
Yeah, second Friday of every month. I highly recommend it because it gives us so much to think about, and you're really good at keeping the ball being passed. So there's all these different points of view. I love it. Yeah. So I just wanted to give you a little there.
Thanks.
Yeah,
yeah, this past one was on adaptability, and then the bottom bar didn't have the breakout room, so it was an exercise in adaptability, but everything adapted really well. It was great.
Exactly. Yeah. It totally worked. It was like holographic.
And on Zoom. So,
exactly. It's all on Zoom, and with 30, you had like 30 people in there.
Something, at least, yeah.
Yeah, so to be able to manage that with that many people is incredible and still interesting. I loved it.
Cool.
So anyways, but today we're going to talk about the pineal gland, right? Am I saying it wrong though? I guess I say it. How do you say it?
The pineal gland, yeah.
Pineal. Okay, some people say pineal. I've always, I don't.
Yeah, tomato still. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic.
I think both are fine. I have heard both, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. People usually know what we're talking about. It's close enough. So, yeah. So you want to start us off?
Okay.
Do you want to start off by tell me anything else, like, bio-wise? I mean, I feel like we've been doing introductions every single time. I'm not sure if we still need to do an introduction, but if there's anything else you want to add as an intro, please do.
You probably should, just in case somebody picks up one particular episode based on the topic.
Word.
So, yeah.
Nice. Okay, good. Let's start with introduction.
Okay, so for everybody who's come back from the previous episodes, thanks so much. Welcome back. It's good to see you guys again. But yeah, for anybody who's new, my name is Nikki Johnson. I'm a writer, a speaker, a discussion leader. And so currently I'm writing a book called The Internal Process of Enlightenment, Bridging Spirituality and Science. And as we've discussed before, this basically covers the process that takes place within the human body to trigger the experiences that we associate, or so many different traditions associate, both spiritual and psychological, that they associate with the process of enlightenment under its many names. And so this process, starts in the brain, goes down the spine, goes back up through the 7 chakras, hits the brain again, releases certain neurotransmitters, other pieces of the brain are involved, and this produces the feelings and the sensations and the experiences that these different traditions associate with enlightenment. So that's where we're going.
And people are also welcome to ask questions or leave comments. I'll be checking in on that as we go.
For sure, yes.
Yeah.
So anyway, today we're going to be talking about pineal gland activation. And so this is basically the end of the process that I'm talking about within this book. So here we are. Ta-da! Yes.
Yeah,
so anyway, now, the pineal gland is a tiny endocrine gland about the size of a soybean, directly in the geometric center of the brain, which is pretty interesting. So now it's shaped like a pine cone, hence the name pineal, however you want to say it, right? But yeah, very important functions, which is why there's a pine cone statue in the Vatican, in the courtyard. So
it has a history of running through religions, this pine cone symbology, and it represents the pineal gland.
Exactly. So as we show on the cover photo for this particular episode, the Egyptians, among many cultures, certainly revered this. So the little symbol that they have for the eye of Horus, this is actually representative of the pineal gland. So you can see the match in terms of, the anatomy there. But
right.
also,
And Egyptians were super into anatomy because of all the mummifications and everything. So they knew the brain.
Exactly.
Yeah, cool.
That's totally what I was going to say too. Yeah, they cut up enough bodies and examined them during the mummification process, but also they were very tapped in intuitively too. And so you figure, they were getting piped in, okay, this is what this is, and this is what this is, and this is why this is important, etc., etc. So yeah. But also for many other cultures. So for example, the Assyrians, you have the winged genie handing I don't know if you've seen this, the winged genie handing the pine cone to initiates. Yeah, I mean,
specials on it. Yeah.
Also representative of this process. We have the Greeks who considered the pineal to be our connection to the realm of thought, potentially higher thought as well.
Right. Okay.
For the Buddhists, it's a symbol of spiritual awakening. For the Hindus, this is why we have the Bindu, the little red dot there, for both men and women. It has a different name for men. Tikal, something.
Isn't that when they're married they wear the dot?
I don't even remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it's connected to the pineal gland anyway.
Yes, exactly. That's what it's representative of.
Got it.
But yeah, and then Descartes, for one, considered this to be the seat of the soul. So definitely a lot of reverence over the centuries for this particular piece of the brain. And why? Well, it's interesting. I mean, there's two different levels of functionality that are sort of recognized. You have sort of the more mundane functions associated with the 3D and 4D reality that most of us are most familiar with, right?
Right.
But then there's also some advanced capabilities that become available once we complete this process that takes place in the spine. So we'll be going over both of those levels of functioning.
Cool.
Yes. Okay. So now you will see so many people refer to the pineal gland as the third eye. But as I mentioned last time, technically, the third eye is associated with the pituitary gland. The crown is associated with the pineal gland. But you will see so many sources and very highly credible ones as well referring to the pineal gland as the third eye. But I figured it out. Okay, so here's why that happens, why that association is. Because once you have a balanced third eye, okay, so you're no longer overactive, no longer underactive, then the energy can flow to the seventh chakra, which is the crown chakra associated with the pineal gland. So essentially, a balanced third eye opens up the capabilities of the seventh chakra, the pineal gland. And again, as we've discussed in previous episodes, this is the transition point. This is essentially the portal or the gateway to another realm of consciousness. Some call it the third harmonic universe, some call it the fifth dimension. One or the other, whatever you like, but basically, this is our way of accessing additional pieces of the superconscious mind that we are currently not experiencing. So pulling down more of that information into our everyday experiences. Or maybe not every day. This can be pretty profound. So yes. So
but certainly during times of pandemic.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
We have plenty of time to go with at this point.
Exactly.
Yes. Now, definitely, if you look it up on many different mainstream science sources, they will say, the pineal gland's function is not completely understood. Now, there is a certain level of functioning which is well recognized, and that would be its role in maintaining circadian rhythm. So it works with a piece of the hypothalamus called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This is our biological clock. And so essentially what happens is when there's darkness, the retina produces a signal that goes to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which, goes the indirect pathway, but it goes to the pineal gland, and this triggers the pineal gland to release melatonin. Melatonin starts to relax the over analytical thinking mind. You start to get drowsy. You are getting very sleepy, and then we go to sleep. You know, a whole different state of consciousness. We go into well, there are four, which we'll get into later, but sleep and dreaming as part of, you know, what happens with melatonin. Now, melatonin has other functions, but, you know, this regulation of the sleep cycle is one key role for it. Now, what's interesting is that as soon as light hits the retina, then a signal goes again through the, you know, this chain, which involves the suprachiasmatic nucleus, goes to the pineal gland, and the pineal gland begins converting some of the melatonin, which is the nighttime neurotransmitter, into serotonin, which is the daytime neurotransmitter. Mm-hmm. Now we got to stop because this is amazing if you really think about it. Okay, yeah. So we have light and dark here. We have the daytime neurotransmitter being converted into the nighttime neurotransmitter. So it's the perfect little yin and yang situation within our body.
Talk about adaptability.
Seriously.
Yeah, yeah.
So the total balance is always constant, but there's just more light and dark at any given time. It's freaking amazing. I mean, how elegant is that in terms of intelligent design? That just blew my mind.
Yeah, our bodies. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So, but anyway, so there are four states of consciousness. So wakefulness, sleep, dreaming, and then a fourth, which would be transcendental experiences. So this would be, you know, times when we're in deep meditation, those times when we're deep in flow, sort of psychedelic states and paranormal experiences and remote viewing, all this stuff. Yeah, right? Cool. What's interesting is that the pineal gland is involved with all four of these states. So even though mainstream science, you know, tends to just focus on its role with the sleep-wake cycle,
right?
It's logical in terms of, okay, so this controls which state of consciousness we are in among these four, not just, you know, those three.
Right.
So, okay. Now, a particularly good source to look at for some of the higher functions, so when you do allow the energy to go straight through to the seventh chakra, which is associated with the pineal gland, a particularly good source to look at for the higher functions is Dr. Joe Dispenza. So I think he originally studied biochemistry, but he also got a BS degree with an emphasis on neuroscience. He also has a chiropractor degree, and but then his postgraduate education has been primarily in neurology, neuroscience, anti-aging, memory formation, things like this. So,
okay, anyway, from that to put into the afterwards?
Yes, okay, definitely. I will include that as part of the links. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, so, you know, he talks about, so as part of the composition of the pineal gland, you have these very, very small crystals. And actually, mainstream science, there are studies that show this. There was one particularly, I think in 2002. I'll link to it, obviously. Okay. But yeah, they talk about a new form of biomineralization that had been discovered. And so, but basically, these very tiny calcite crystals allow the pineal gland to serve as a neuroendocrine transducer with piezoelectric properties. Now, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, seriously. Okay.
Please explain. Yeah.
Will do. So a transducer is something that takes energy from one form and converts it into another. An example would be a TV or a radio. So it takes TV or radio signals, turns it into a picture, turns it into sound that we can then, you know, receive and interpret. Okay. So Piezoelectricity is when you take, when mechanical stress is applied and it produces electrical charge, okay? And so this is actually what occurs in the pineal gland. And I know at first it's like, wait, what? But let's remember that the brain is electric.
Right.
The nervous system is electric.
Yeah.
Synapses,
Yeah.
electric.
Yeah.
We have electrical signals going through our brain, throughout our body, all day long. So much so that we don't even think about it, okay? So this is just another form of electricity that comes into play. Okay, so the idea...
pineal gland, it gets changed. Is the pineal gland the only one? But when it goes through the pineal gland, is the pineal gland the only part of the brain that transforms it and evolves it into something else?
Okay, here's exactly what goes on. So inner thecal pressure is applied. So when this fluid goes straight up through the spine and hits it with a certain amount of pressure, then it produces an electrical charge. That's the idea.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so it's not really changing. It's just...
Right. Now, he also explains how this causes compression of the crystals, which then... So basically, the inductance field that is created starts to pulse a little bit, right? And this allows it to pick up frequencies in the same way that a TV or a radio would. But as we discussed in our last chakra episode, okay, remember the energy spectrum that goes with the chakras. So the seventh chakra has a higher energy range than the chakras below it. So now, once we've activated this, now we're picking up frequencies that are above the energy spectrum of visible light. Okay, and so this is... Now we're going beyond the five senses. Now we're creating these internal experiences for people that feel more real than, our everyday 3D, 4D reality, okay? Which is amazing. So, but you combine this with what we discussed in the second episode about potentially 3D, 4D reality being a simulation of sort. You think about then too, people who have near-death experiences and they come back and they say, that felt more real than what I experience every day here. Okay. This you get this same comparison of the experiences that come through this channel. For so many people, as he's saying, other people have reported as well, these experiences feel more real than what we consider to be everyday reality, which is amazing.
Yeah, and
so
sounds like DMT too.
Oh yes, that's on the list as well. So we'll get to that. But but
yeah, of course that is DMT. Okay.
Yes, we are always in sync.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, interestingly though, this same thing, piezoelectricity, this is found in the Egyptian, this was used in the Egyptian pyramids, and it was also the principle that Tesla applied with his Wardenclyffe Tower, and the concept that he had about, producing free energy for everyone wirelessly. Okay, it's the exact same thing, and we can put those links in the description as well. But basically... Yeah, so, I mean, and my cousin and I went to Egypt together a couple of years ago, and so we learned this link. The official Egyptology story behind the pyramids is, these were tombs. Really? Because nobody...
debunked for years now.
Totally. Because no bodies were ever found there.
Right.
They don't have any hieroglyphs, which is so... I mean, all the pharaohs did that with everything that they built, right? There's nothing on it. But anyway, so this video that we can put in the description, it's so cool. And there's so many like it as well, by the way.
Yeah.
But they talk about how there are these aquifers underneath the pyramids, which serve the same role that this solution, the cerebrospinal fluid does, and by the way, the pineal gland sits in the cerebrospinal fluid. And by the way, too, the cerebrospinal fluid is the sort of physical counterpart to Kundalini energy. So with all of this stuff, remember, there's a physical side to it and a metaphysical side to it. And they are mirrored. Okay. Yes. And so you just look at what's going on the physical side, you might not get the full picture. But if we look at, okay, here's what's going on metaphysically. Yes, we can't necessarily observe these things with our five senses, but here's the causal layer that is driving this stuff and is directly connected to it. Okay, now it all makes sense, right?
Yeah, that's what the Egyptians figured out.
Yes. So anyway, the pineal gland sits in the cerebral spinal fluid, which is Kundalini energy. It is full of these charged particles because it's got salt in it, and that is what helps to produce, the electricity. So because they're charged particles,
right?
But you also have that same principle being applied in Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower, which is right.
Yeah.
So anyway, but yeah, what else was I going to say here?
I always say that all things, if we just look to biology or nature, there's answers to everything that we need, even in our professional lives, and our, the solution to how to create sustainable environments. Whether it be in a business environment or a home environment, you can just look to how nature has done that naturally.
Yes.
So that's a perfect example of it.
Nature is amazing. Yeah. And sort of the thing that you were talking about before, the fractalized nature of this. And the repeats of these patterns just everywhere. It's mind blowing.
And everything that cool.
Yeah. So, a lot of spiritual traditions talk about, the pineal gland being a way, sort of this portal to switching to a new source of energy. So instead of, 3D, 4D reality, we're essentially trading energy with other people on this plane. And we got different ways of doing it. Sometimes we steal it. Sometimes we barter. Sometimes total negotiation, symbiosis kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Giving and receiving. Okay. But so many spiritual traditions talk about, the 5D level is more about, receiving it's Tesla's free energy, right? We're connecting with a higher source of energy and information. And so you look at this and you can see that mirrored in a physical way in this process. So that's cool, really cool.
Yeah.
But also, you mentioned tryptophan. So I think you mentioned tryptophan.
DMT.
Yes. Okay. Oh, that's also on here. So interestingly, the melatonin, serotonin, they're both derived from the same thing, and that is tryptophan. So remember that it comes around every year in November because this is the essential amino acid that's in turkey, Thanksgiving turkey, that makes everybody drowsy.
Right. Which is connected to the circadian rhythm.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. So this is one of the molecules that melatonin, sort of between, I think, serotonin and melatonin, sorry. But there are other chemicals that are very close to melatonin that it can be converted into. One of them is the same chemical that is found in hibernating animals, that kind of allows them to withdraw their attention from the outside world, to shut down all these different processes and just go within, right? Have inner experience, go into an altered state of consciousness, really deep sleep. Okay. So that's involved in this as well. There are also
that's what we should be doing during the pandemic.
Yes. Exactly.
We are in hibernation essentially, so why not take the time to look inward? So
exactly.
Yeah.
That was the whole point of our first episode, I think.
Exactly.
Perfect time to be, and I believe this is for those who are ready. this is a perfect time, perfect opportunity that we've been given to focus primarily on going within and to get away from all of those external distractions, which would otherwise pull our attention in different directions.
Right.
So,
It's all in here. We're learning.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
Exactly. But other chemicals that melatonin can be very easily converted into, some of them are benzodiazepines and some of these others, which are difficult to pronounce. But anyway, but antioxidants, anti-aging. And so these, with this, when you hear about the transition to this next realm of consciousness, there's also healing components to this.
Yes.
This is where all of that enters. Okay,
everywhere,
then also
from the skin to inside, for all layers. Yeah.
Yes.
Healing.
Exactly. But then finally, probably the most complex, that's also very close, is DMT. And this already has been theorized by certain scientists, although it hasn't been proven, of course.
There have been clinical trials, before it was kind of outlawed, and then now it's starting. Well, now there's tests being done on other forms of DMT, but it's close to being proven. I think it just hasn't had the stamp. I think it actually probably has been proven.
Yes. You will find scientists that talk about this for sure.
That have done trials.
Exactly what you said. It hasn't been given the official stamp of approval by science. Yeah, but anyway, that it does exist in the pineal gland, and even some say, during really deep dreams. This is what helps to produce the really vivid imagery that we see.
Oh, cool.
Also, yes. But then also, obviously, during the use of certain psychedelics, definitely involved. But also, this is what occurs at death. And so this is the reason for the association with, the whole death, rebirth.
Because, and I've also heard
the transition from one realm to another.
Yeah. And also apparently there's a time in the womb, when the baby's in the womb, that it opens, your pineal gland opens at one point and secrete, and I guess this DMT comes out or something like that. But that's why it's associated. It happens that it's the same thing that happens when you die. It happens once when you're in the womb, and that's why they call it the spirit molecule DMT, right? Because they associate it with like the soul coming in and the soul going out, which I think is kind of nice.
Oh, yes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay, I think I covered that page. So and then it also works with the pituitary gland. It releases other neurotransmitters, and most prominently, I guess, oxytocin, which is the love hormone. So this is why you get the sort of feelings of bliss, charged love and joy and happiness that are also associated with enlightenment as well. So between the DMT driving the really amazing imagery, and you got the oxytocin driving all these really happy, fun feelings, it's a good place to be.
The clinical trials that I've seen that were, again, not sanctioned, I guess, although they were done these were like the clinical trials in the early 60s, before it became outlawed. The people who were going through the studies, all that had DMT, and it was associated with the pineal gland, they all experienced, they explained it separately in their own words as a kind of seeing what there is beyond life and death, and it felt more real, as you were talking about earlier, than reality.
You hear that again and again.
Yes, like it really is kind of proof of something beyond, which is nice, because that's one of the things everyone complains about, is that we have no proof. We have no proof. Maybe we do.
Yes, I think we're right on the verge. So anyway, okay. So how do we do it? Right? How do we get there?
How do we?
Okay. Well, certainly one side of it is the process that we've mentioned again and again, the subject of my book, this process that takes place within the spinal column.
Right.
And so, right. And the physical, the metaphysical side. Now, one thing that I should mention as well, so the Ida and the Pingala, so, and we see these represented, as we said, in the caduceus, so the medical symbol, as the two snakes that drive polarized experience, okay? These are also associated with the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. So again, the mirrored sides, you have on the physical side, the Pingala is associated with the sympathetic nervous system. The Ida is associated with the parasympathetic nervous system.
Okay.
So yeah, it's directing that energy instead of through those little snakes straight up through the Shoshona, through using the cerebral spinal fluid, the Kundalini energy as the solution, it goes all the way up through the six chakras to the seventh, and that's what triggers these sorts of things.
And that's what when you say trigger, do you mean that's when the pineal gland opens?
The pineal gland is open because it is maintaining those circadian rhythms already.
Oh,
there are just, as I mentioned in the beginning, sort of two levels of functioning for this gland.
Got it.
Similar to much of our brains, similar to, much of our DNA, which is supposedly junk DNA, right? No, it's just in this dormant state. There are latent capabilities in there that we just haven't touched yet. So it's similar to that. It's activating additional functions of these things that we already have inside of us. That's why the answers are going within. So, but yeah, so that is definitely one side of the equation, and I would say the more important side. And this is where you have, millions and millions of books that are written on enlightenment under its many names. So, for example, Carl Jung called it individuation. So, pulling up all of that subconscious material. But also, we talked about in our last episode with the chakras, each one is associated with these particular emotional, behavioral type issues. We got to balance them all. We can't be overactive or underactive. We got to have that sweet spot right down the middle, left. Yes.
Hey, yeah, that's very Taoist too. That's Taoist path, and it's also Joseph Campbell called it apotheosis or
apotheosis.
Apotheosis.
So
yes. I look at it. I can't always say it, but yes.
Yes. So that's that. But then, in a lot of videos that you'll see on YouTube, they focus more on just the physical portion of it. But I want to stress to everybody, this is not a one-shot deal. When you see these YouTube videos that say, hey, watch this video and you'll open your pineal or activate your pineal gland. No. It's a little more complicated than that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, to the credit of these other videos, there are things that we can do to make sure that once we've completed this process, that the pineal gland is in an accessible state. Now, one of the biggest problems is calcification of this gland. Yes. And so it has the highest level of calcification of any tissue or organ in the body. Typically, 2/3, they say, 2/3 of the adult population, their pineal gland is calcified. Yes. So, kind of a problem. Yeah. At least right now. We're getting better.
Yes, we are in a time of awakening.
I love it.
We're cleaning that calcification off.
Exactly.
Decalcifying. Yes.
But I thought it was interesting too, as I was scribbling down my little note, they don't really mention that calcification is actually a problem with many body parts as we get older. And that's what the issue is here. So this tends to get worse as you get older, as age increases. But, so many other body parts have the same issue. So arteries, heart valves, joints, kidney, et cetera, But there are also brain calcification. So there are particular pieces of the brain that are more susceptible to this than others. And I was looking at this one study by a Turkish team about intracranial calcification. And I was looking at the parts that they sort of cited as the most common places for this. Super interesting, because these parts are all seem to be associated with aspects of consciousness. So initially, when I looked at the list, I saw, pineal glands at the top, but then you also have the choroid plexus. And this is the part of the brain that produces cerebral spinal fluid. Again, in our metaphysical, this is Kundalini energy. This is where this is produced. These were two of the parts that were on this. So then I went through all of the others as well. And very interesting. So I won't go through them all.
But it's almost like as the older we get, the more we forget. We forget like what we really are as in consciousness, or where we came from as in something beyond. And it's easier to forget as we get older, which is true, because I think, just as a side note, is the older you get, the more you don't really you feel like you've lived so long, you don't have to play the game. You don't want to play the game. You don't want to work so hard. You just want to relax into living. And part of that, though, relaxing into living, I think, is forgetting the spiritual work in some ways. Not for everybody. Obviously, there's exceptions to every rule, but I think that that's common in maybe 2/3 of the population. Who knows?
But for sure, it's so easy to get distracted by all of the material priorities that we have as an adult. Okay, but what's interesting about the coronavirus is, for many of us, it's kind of wiped those things out of the way for a little while. So again, perfect opportunity to sort of start playing with this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Or continue.
Yeah.
Probably a lot of you, are on your way. So yeah, but anyway.
You're watching this video for sure.
Yes. But anyway, but the point that I wanted to make in looking at these different parts and so for example, basal ganglia was on the list as well, and I saw some places where we were thinking, this may be the seat of self-awareness, and it's also a part of the brain that is associated with so for amputees, when they have this sense of a phantom limb, so the arm isn't there anymore, but they still have sensations of that. It's associated with it. So anyway, I went down the list, and just all of the pieces that get calcified have this certain aspect of consciousness to them. And I didn't see anybody talking about this, but the thought that hit my head is, okay, again, going back to, episode 2, simulation theory. So let's say, as I personally believe, that, we're sort of locked into this chamber of consciousness, 3D, 4D, for a little while on purpose, because the objective of this realm is to get us to develop a certain sense of moral responsibility, so that we are, when we are let out and we start accessing, some of these capabilities that are associated with the superconscious mind, things that some people might call superhuman. As we start to play with more of that stuff, well, we've gone through the training program. We've developed the moral responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility, that sort of thing, right? Yeah, so now we can be adventurers.
Totally.
Yeah, so... But, we're clamped in this space on purpose, learn the lessons, develop yourself into a morally responsible human being. And so, the fact that this calcium sort of gathers in these certain spots that are associated with, higher consciousness, or just aspects of consciousness is what I saw. But, I thought about, okay, so what about... like when you have a river and it's dammed, and all of a sudden, ordinarily you have a straight path through to much further beyond, right? But it's dammed at a certain point, because again, we're kept in this little chamber. Yeah, exactly. So perhaps, that would be a reason for why these particular places have these deposits that ordinarily there's a lot more energy rolling through. There's, you know, originally it could travel up and down this very easily. You know, you could explore all these different layers. But through the fall of man, which would be the descent into 3D, 4D reality. Okay, and then we got to finish the training program. We got to develop that moral responsibility until, yay, you know, the river is no longer dammed. At least until that next chamber. And I think it's probably like a series of Russian dolls.
Yeah,
you know?
no, I like that.
Yeah,
it's also a nice reminder to like release judgment. And instead of like, because I think so many people long for that and are reaching to enlightenment, if you will, and are reaching for that so much that they're not seeing what's right in front of them. And so it's kind of a nice reminder that maybe you're locked here in that because you need to be there. There's something for you there.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, instead of like fixating on what's beyond, it's staying here, staying present, staying in the moment, staying in the middle. So yeah, I really like that. Oh, and by the way, we're at 40 minutes.
Okay.
But keep going, because this is good. This is good stuff.
Fabulous. Okay. So anyway, in terms of calcification and what we can do to help prevent that. So first thing on the list is fluoride. This has been proven as a calcifying agent. So filter your water, purify your water. And I would recommend fluoride-free toothpaste as well. If there's one thing you're going to do, get on those things.
Yeah, and it's everywhere. Fluoride is everywhere. But eliminating that helps decalcify.
Yes, and of course, it's in our public water supply. So
yeah, it's really hard to get away from. And I think
but at the same time, I see the other side of it where, okay, you know, this realm of 3D, 4D, and potentially transitioning into starting to access higher realms, you know, it keeps people in the place where they're supposed to be. For those who are focused on those 3D lessons, they're probably drinking the public water and, you know, it keeps them in that realm. But for those who are starting to question, okay, I'm using different sources, I'm starting to purify my water, you know? So I think there's intelligent design, as crazy as it all might appear.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay. Next on the list, so try and avoid pesticides, herbicides. So as much whole organic food as you can take on, certainly do that. And clearly there are other benefits beyond just helping to avoid calcification of the pineal gland. Another thing, so try and avoid calcium supplements. So most of the time they contain calcium carbonate. Most of the time don't even need that, and that's what gunk's on there, and you don't want that. So try and use natural sources of calcium.
Good.
Okay. And other than that, avoid processed stuff. So
and then something I read was talking about pots and pans. Are you familiar? Like, there's certain pots and pans that are made.
I had read that on a couple sites. Yes.
Yeah, before. Like, it's everywhere, you know. So but you can do little things, you know, whatever you can do. It all helps.
Yeah.
Know? And
I think that was associated with fluoride as well.
What is?
Or was that with heavy metals?
Yeah, no, I think it was fluoride. It was fluoride. It was.
Yeah, I thought it was too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the kind of nonstick pans or something that they put. Yeah, I think it's nonstick pans actually. Whatever they put on it has got fluoride in it. So it's you know, it's hard to avoid. But it's also just you know, it may be impossible to avoid completely, but even limiting it, like again, like you said, you can start with water or you can start with toothpaste.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and for people who are interested in this, I would recommend, so you will see some conflicting information in terms of, you know, you have to go all vegan or, dude, I've tried that 3 times in my life. I would love to do it, but dude, like the weight starts falling off of me, which at first is really awesome, but then like it gets to the point where I can't pick up my legs and like they're too weak. And, it's crazy. It seems it's and the only explanation that I can come up with is I tend to be so ungrounded, right? I need something in my life to keep me planted here.
Yeah, totally grounded.
Yes, yes. And also Santos Bonacci talks about certain cell salts, and one of mine is calcium related. So that's one of the ones that's deficient. Like
Okay.
from an astrological perspective, development within the womb, there are certain cell salts that you're deficient in, 3 months worth, because we're in the womb for 9 months. Calcium is on my particular list. But anyway, that said, another good thing, meditation. So, and I was going to share with everybody. So, the particular form that I like, I combine 3 different methods. So, in one of the links that we'll put in the description, there's a method that Dr. Joe Dispenza recommends. I kind of combine that with the Wim Hof technique and also Tribindu Pranayama. So, have you heard of the Wim Hof?
Yeah, the cold guy.
Okay.
He did all the studies on the cold. Yeah, and had the
yes, exactly.
cold on your body, extreme cold, like cold showers. I've been meaning to try that, but it sounds terrifying. I don't like the cold at all.
I don't even do the cold showers.
Okay.
I did before. Yeah. No, this is breathing. So, 3 in and out. 30 in and out breaths, okay, really fast. But I combine that with Dispenza. So Dispenza talks about how, so for most people, well, individually and collectively, most of our energy is stored. It kind of bundles in that lower 3 sections. The ones that are focused on survival, procreation, and personal power. Okay.
Right.
We want to move that energy up, into the higher centers. And so there's a technique that he recommends, which we'll put in the description. But also then I combine that too with another technique called Tribindu Pranayama. Now pranayama is a lot of people, I think just pranayama by itself is the alternate nostril breathing. And I don't know if you realize this, but our body normally just will alternate breathing between one nostril versus another. Yeah, that makes sense actually. When I think about when I would have a cold, I barely get them anymore. But what I would, sometimes like just one nostril is blocked.
Yeah,
that's sort of why, because usually only one nostril is working at any given time. You'll have a very light. Anyway, this pranayama actually helps kind of balance. Again, it's all about balancing the energy that's flowing through the 2 channels. Making the 2 become 1, essentially. But the Tribindu pranayama, so it's like a cycle of breathing, 3, 5, 7. And we'll put the link in the description as well. But anyway, I combine that with, so as I'm doing these, focus on each of the chakras. Now I do it with 14. People can do it with as many as they want. With 14, it ends up taking me about an hour, almost to the dot every time. So if you do it with just the 7, it should probably be around a half hour. But I try and do that once or twice a day, and it's amazing.
Wow. Yeah.
Of the 3 techniques, so the Dispenza one I get from a logical perspective, but actually my favorite personally is the Tribindu Pranayama. So cool. It's so relaxing, and I can feel it definitely too in terms of my mood. It gets out of, it eliminates a lot of that little chatter. And just really smooth, especially when I do it twice a day.
Clearing your mind at all. Like I always tell people to start with just 5 minutes every hour. Set your alarm for every hour and just take 5 minutes to clear your mind. I think in general, clearing your mind, focusing in on your breath. I mean, it's definitely better to do it at least 15. But as a starting point for people who have a really hard time with it, it's a start to just 5 minutes, because whenever you're clearing your mind is when the healing can kind of start to begin. You're probably not going to get much in the 5 minutes, but it'll prepare you to do these longer ones, for people who have the time quieting their brains.
I think that's great. Yeah. And a constant focus on it throughout the day. That's really cool.
Exactly.
Anyway, that's what I got. That's what I got for the day. So
awesome. Okay, cool. Thank you so much. It's a lot to take in, but we're going to post all the links. This will be available on YouTube, on our channel. So another way of viewing reality, I think is what we're calling it. So check us out, and we'll be back next week with something new and exciting. So tune in then. Thank you, Nikki. Oh, final words. Final words. Your final words.
Oh, I think we should just probably end with the same sort of theme that we've ended with on other episodes, that, you know, this is another way to view reality. And so, but you know, and some of this stuff like the piezoelectricity, I'm like, whoa. Okay, but you don't have to decide right now. But instead of saying one way or the other, just leave it open as a question in your mind. Maybe do some research, maybe even just sit back and see what ends up popping up into your reality. But see where the evidence kind of stacks up that way.
See where the coincidences lie, you know, and
that's how it started for me, honestly.
Me too.
So interesting when that happens.
Cool. So thank you so much, Nikki Johnson. We will see you guys next time. Bye.
Okay, thank you.